Level training, getting ready to assess the occupational specialism bite-size session. And this bite-size session is going to look at the retail and commercial banking occupational specialism. As there has been a live assessment of the retail and commercial banking occupational specialism, we've utilised the summer 2024 past paper and mark scheme for this training session. So if you would like to go onto the Pearson website and download a copy of those from there, it'd be really useful for you to follow along as we go through this bite-sized session, because there's so much information that's provided to students and to teachers. So things like stimulus material, pre-release material, and the mark scheme, the indicative content and all the marking grids. What we've done for this bite-sized session is we've picked out sort of snippets from the documents and provide a sort of an overview for you. So if you have got the originals next to you, it'd be useful for you to see sort of the wider picture of how it's sort of working, rather than just looking at the small section that we're going to look at today. Looking at the different tasks and the mark scheme, it'd be important to think about what skills do you think learners are going to need to help them to handle the pre-release and resource booklets, and how do you think you can develop these skills. So as we go through and we're looking at the skills and things, we will consider and we'll discuss different ways that you can sort of develop skills, or maybe you look at exam technique, or even potentially you're looking at resourcing and industrial placements. But it'd be useful if you're, as you're looking at it and you're looking at that sort of 2024 paper and you're thinking, oh, actually, that would be a really useful strategy I've tried. At least you've got like a lovely long list of strategies then, as soon as you finish, that you can go away and you can sort of start to embed or utilize within your teaching to prepare the students for the occupational specialism. So the retail and banking occupational specialism then comes with a pre-release. So you can see here an element of the task one pre-release. There is more stimulus material, so please feel free to go and have a look at the sort of the originals from 2024. But what I've done is I've picked out some key overviews just to give you sort of an insight of the sorts of levels of information that students are going to get in that pre-release. Now, the pre-release is generally sort of a day or two, maximum a week before task one sat. And what it's designed to do is to allow students to familiarise themselves with a range of products, so that when they come into their tasks, they're not having to try and learn the products and then do the task, because there's just not the time. But it's there, they can have a look at these. But what it will be important to do is to teach the students how to use this. A lot of them are going to look at this and think, well, I don't know what to do with it. Where's it going to go? What do I need to do with it? So it's going to be really important as one of the exam strategies to teach them, okay, what you've got here is you've got all of these different things, and what you're going to want to do with them is... So in the instance here, we've got the pre-release brief that tells them they're working for a local bank, tells them that they're in the retail banking division, they've been given the information about that they're preparing for meetings with new customers, they've been told what products are available. So you can see they've got payment services, financing, savings, mortgages, delivery channels, current account, insurance, pensions, investments. So it's a lot of information. And then what you can see here is some of the information that they've been provided with. So what you're going to want the students to sort of develop the skills for is sort of maybe jotting down and thinking about, okay, so who are these going to be most important for? What sort of features are there here? Is this going to be relevant for everyone, or are there going to be sort of specific groups that this might be more aimed towards? Now, they will have seen the past papers. There is a SAM, a sample assessment material, and an ADSAM, an additional sample assessment material on the website, in addition to the 2024 paper. And come the summer, there'll also be the 2025 paper that you can look at. So you can sort of give them the stimulus material and get them used to looking at the tasks and developing those activities and developing those skills, so that when they come to their real occupational specialism in whatever academic year it is they do that, that they are familiar with what this is asking them to do. So The pre-release is designed to give them a whole range of these different products that are available that they can then use to provide information and advice and guidance to the clients as they go through the different tasks. So here you can see task one. Again, these are snippets of the information because there is a lot of information that is available for students. And this obviously is in addition to that pre-release. So if you've got students that are easily overwhelmed by the amounts of data, this is going to be another important skill to teach them. That look, yes, there is a lot, but here's what you're going to have to do to select it. So if you're doing, say, a transition T-level, it might be worth starting them out in the transition T-level with a how to read and select data from large quantities. If they're coming straight onto your T-level in year one, maybe it's worth having sort of like an induction or skills boot camp where you teach them these sorts of skills. So how to read large amounts of data quite quickly, how to sort of highlight key points, how to select information, sort of how to ignore the sort of the noise, the material, like the materials and the information you don't need, because it will stand them in really good stead for sort of their employer set project and into particularly these occupational specialisms, but also it's going to be really useful for them in their industrial placements because obviously they'll have that sort of knowledge of how to filter out and really drill down to what information they need in order to make sort of or provide informed sort of decisions and sort of recommendations. So looking back to task one, then you can see here we've got section A. So in here we've got the set task brief, so it tells them that again the three that are going to be considering. So that's current account, savings and insurance. It's given them some information about the customers there. It's given them other information over there about what they've already got in terms of those particular products themselves. Obviously, then it's given them some of the pre-release material down there, so like insurance products and things like that. And then you can see in the middle there, in amongst all of that and all the other information that you'd see in the real brief, if you had a look, the tasks that they're going to have to do. So it's important to note that for task one, they are going to get marks, 3 marks, what you might know as quality of written communication historically. So for this, it's to do with the structure, clarity and conciseness of their response. So if they're being asked to write a report, if they're being asked to write an email, that they've got the structure of that right. Maybe they're using headings, maybe using bullets, maybe they're using the right introduction, they've got contents, whatever it is that they're needing to do for the sort of written communication method they're using. And how concise and clear their information is. And then they're also getting marks for the use of technical and non-technical language that's appropriate. So where you're maybe writing to these customers, they're not going to want to be using maybe highly technical language, or if they are, they're going to explain it so that the customer understands. Whereas if maybe they were talking and giving advice to a client, not a client, to like a colleague or someone in the industry, maybe they'd use more technical language. So it's about them figuring out what's the right level, because you're not going to want too informal, but equally you might not want too formal. So there are 3 marks that are available for students for that. And then as they come into sort of, I've only included one activity here. You can see this is 1AI. There are other activities that they're going to have to do. So time management is going to be an essential skill for these tasks. Not only are they going to have to read through it or pick out all the information, they've got multiple tasks they're going to need to do. So you can see here that for this activity, they're being asked to analyse how the features, risks and benefits of different products apply and then make recommendations. And when you look at the other tasks, you're going to see that they've got that same structure of do the analysis, make recommendations, do the analysis, make recommendations. So in terms of teaching them exam content and developing a structure, because many of them will come from sort of GCSE level 2 or other qualifications used to writing to a specific structure. And there's lots of different acronyms out there for structures. That you can develop your own for this because you can see exactly what it is they need to do. So do the analysis of there and then the justifications. So it might be you start out by getting them to give like a quick summary of the client, what their needs are. Then maybe they're going to talk about the relevant products. Maybe they're going to pick 2 or 3 of the relevant products, given that they haven't got time to maybe do all of them with everything they're going to have to do within the time available. then obviously the features, the risks, the benefits, do that comparison, and then make their justification at the end. So it might be that it's that structure, it might be you come up with a slightly different structure, but as long as it's sort of covering all of that, then they're sort of set to be sort of successful in their occupational specialism. Students have completed those activities, they're then going to be marked by examiners at Pearson. So as you can see on the screen here, this is a snippet from the mark scheme. There are more pages of this. So this is marked on what we call a levels-based mark scheme. So on the right here, you can see that you've got that lovely table. So there are 3 mark bands, and then there's obviously the mark band 0. So mark band 0 is where the student has provided no rewards, more material. So it might be that it's a blank document, it might be this just got their name and sort of learner ID number on. They might have set out the structure of the report with all the headings, but they've not sort of written anything in there. If they've then written something that's sort of vaguely relevant or sort of linked to what they're doing, or even if it's not linked but it is relevant, then they're going to be in band 1. Okay, so as you look at these bands, you can see they've got some very clear language within them. So within band 1, it's talking about limited detail and partially relevant. So it might be that they've not got a lot of detail. It might be that it's more sort of simple statements or in bullet point form. It might be that what they're saying is right, but it's not relevant to sort of the scenario and the stimulus material they've been given. As you move up into band 2, you can see that this is talking about generally sort of detailed or mostly relevant to the scenario. So you might also see this sort of and think this is like a good example. So they've picked out most of the key points, the recommendations they're making are relevant to sort of the scenario, the customer they've been given. They've probably picked the right like sort of products there, be it the insurance or the savings, but there's probably some bits they've missed, or maybe they've sort of misread something and that their recommendation's not quite perfect. So that's just sort of in the middle there. It's a really good example, but there's still quite a few bits maybe that they could change. And up at the top there, you've got that thoroughly detailed and thoroughly relevant. These are those ones that you look at and you think that's really good. They're the ones that you pick up and you think, actually, with a little bit of a tweak, we could actually use this for a client or a customer. Okay, they're going to have got it right. They're going to have picked out most of the key points. They've probably recommended the right insurance. There might be still some like minor misconceptions, or they might have missed out maybe a little like something not quite so serious, like a minor thing, just because maybe they're under a time crunch and they've had to move on. But you will notice these will be the ones that you think actually they're really quite good. I'm not sure what else they could add. That's the sort of ones that are up there. Okay, and as you can see down the bottom again, they've got the same approach when it comes to the justifications there, or the suitability of the products that they're choosing. Now, what you can see on the left is what is the indicative content and marker guidance. So the indicative content is just what the senior examiners think that students are likely to respond based on the stimulus material and the tasks that they've been asked to complete. These are not exhaustive. Students will come up with things that are outside the realms of this, which is why the examiners are specialists, so that when they're marking this, if they see something that's not what's in the mark scheme, they can use that specialist knowledge to go, do you know what? Yeah, actually, that would be an appropriate recommendation based on the material that's provided. Okay, so whilst it's nice if students are producing stuff that's in the indicative content, it's obviously not going to penalise them if they're coming up with relevant and appropriate sort of suggestions and recommendations that aren't there. Okay, now there are going to be the odd question that you might see where if it's like a financy question, and it's, I don't know, it's gross profit. There's only one answer for gross profit. So in that instance, it would be yes or no, they'd get the marks or they wouldn't. But when you see these sorts of questions, or you might have seen it referred to as sort of accept any other suitable response or any other acceptable answer in mark schemes on papers, that's what's going on here. Okay, so yes, if they're doing things that are in there, it's brilliant. But if you're seeing sort of your marking formative assessment for them and maybe they're coming up with recommendations. You're thinking, well, actually that's right, but it's not on here. Then as long as it is appropriate and accurate, then you can award them. The other thing you can look at sort of when you're giving them formative assessment is if you're not comfortable maybe giving them points like the marks, because obviously some students might sort of step off the gas once they're getting quite a good mark, it might be more appropriate that you could use the terminology. So the limited, the generally, and the thoroughly detailed, the generally detailed and the thoroughly detailed, because those terminology runs across all of the mark bands in all the tasks. So when they're handing in tasks, you could give them, oh, that's quite limited, or oh, that's thoroughly detailed, and then the students get used to what bands they're in rather than focusing on numbers, because what you want them to be doing is focusing on everything being like that, thoroughly detailed and entirely relevant or thoroughly relevant. So it's another way that you can do it as well. To task 2 then, you can see that here they've been given stimulus material of emails. So at the start of every task, there's an email. So you can see A, B, C, and D there. And then what the students are going to be asked to do is respond to them. So again, if you have a look, it's very similar to task 1, except this is using explore rather than maybe analyze. So they've got to explore the features, the risks, and the benefits of, in this case, short and medium term finance, and then justify it again. And then as you look through the others, again, they're looking at the features, the risks and benefits of what we've got. We've got commercial mortgages, foreign currency accounts, and investment strategies. And then they're making recommendations. So it's very similar to task 1. So it means that that strategy that you were developing with them in task 1 on how to answer the questions, they're going to be here again so they can use them, so they can keep that strategy going. It's also really useful if, because they've got these consistent tasks, and what you'll find is with T levels, the tasks are going to stay. So this is the bit at the bottom here where it says using the template explore. They're going to stay fairly static. They won't change. Maybe the way that you're being asked to present the material, like the materials might change. So instead of a report, it might be an email. Instead of a recording, it might be a presentation. It's the stimulus material that's going to change each time. So these emails would change. So if you can build up as a team a bank of, as we said, maybe the investment products or the retail banking products, or you can have a set of these sorts of emails, then you can use these as teaching materials in class. It might be that at the start of the year you give them one of these, like some of these emails, and you ask them just to explore features and products of products. It might be as they go on, you ask them to justify it. And what you can do is, because the tasks stay the same, you can just swap out the email. So each time they come in, you can change it. So you've got this whole sort of continuous run of things that they can be writing and practicing with. Again, if you wanted to use it as like a think, pair, share activity, if you want more engagement, then maybe you could get one student to write the email and then they pass it along, and then one student maybe explores the sort of products that might be most appropriate, and then it goes along again and another student does the conclusions on why that's best. It might be that you ask a student to write sort of the answer and then they give it to another student anonymously if they prefer, and they then provide them guidance on what they needed to do to improve it further, or things like that. So you've got a whole range of different ways that, because those tasks are static, as long as you can get that stimulus material, you can get them practicing. Another way to do it is you've got a fairly consistent format to some of these. Ask staff to write some for you, any staff. I mean, they can make it up if they want to. Say they're looking at savings for, I don't know, saving to get married, saving for a holiday of a lifetime, saving for a car. They could make up the data, send it to the teaching team, and then you can utilize it as you go through. So you've got that, or if you can bring employers in, so your industrial placement employers, get them to write you some scenarios of maybe client sort of case studies that they've got that you could use. And obviously the more you've built up, the more practice the students get. The more practice students get, the more confident they are when it comes to their actual occupational specialism, so they're going to be confident in answering and sort of adapting to these sorts of questions. So as you can see here, this is just a quick overview of the Task 2 mark scheme, and it is just a snippet. There is a load more that you can go and get if you get the past paper mark scheme off the website. So again, you can see here the indicative contents of what we're expecting students might do. Again, if they go slightly off piste and they give you something else that's relevant but not included, but not in there, then obviously award them the appropriate marks. And then you can see on the right there that it's exactly the same structure, exactly the same terminology for those mark bands. So you've got that consistency there. So students can sort of rely on that and get used to that as they're going through. So then as we move into task 3, you can see here that it's sort of developing on what they've got. So for the task 3, what they've done is they're going to be asked to do a recording in this instance based on the advice that they've already given in task 1 and task 2. So they're going to need to be very careful here that they read which specific example that they're going to be asked to do for each, because obviously they've considered a number of different products and services in task 1 and task 2 at this point. So in this instance, it's record a message to each of the retail banking customers you responded to, in which you talk them through your recommendations, and then they're going to be asked to talk about the features and the benefits and risks of the products. Now, it is clear here, it says it should be a maximum of 10 minutes. So if you've got students that like to talk, they're going to need to learn to get that down below 10 minutes. And if you've got students who are a little bit more reluctant to talk, it might be around teaching them how to structure their notes so that they can get up to, say, 2/3 or 3/4 of the time by having a clear structure of, okay, maybe start out with an introduction. You've given me this about you. These are the products that I'm recommending. This is why. And breaking it down that way so it doesn't look quite so scary the whole 10 minutes. By the time you've broken it down into all these sort of sub things they need to talk about, they're probably only talking for a minute 30, like a minute 90 seconds on each sort of element of it, and it'd be much easier for them to sort of focus on. And again, you can see there in task 2, they're going to do the same with their commercial banking clients. So with this, it's also useful for maybe in class you could get them to practice presentations in case that's maybe one way it's being presented in future. And just getting them to do a whole range of activities. It might also be that you can do, like, I don't know, an advice clinic. So give other students or staff case studies that you've collected, ask them to pop in and get the students to actually practice giving the advice face to face, because it'd be less scary to record the advice than maybe it'll be to give it face to face. And if they've got that expertise, they're used to it, then when they come to this activity, it'd be quite nice. In terms of logistics for this, it's worth starting to think about it quite early on. Will you need microphones? Will you need cameras? Have you got a quiet room in the building where you can do this activity? Are other assessments going on at the same time that are going to need those materials as well? So you've got all of those sorts of things you want to think about, because this is going to be quite time intensive. So you can see there, say it's 20 minutes, but realistically, by the time you stop, you reset, you start them again, they change their notes, you're probably talking about 30 minutes a student. If you've got a full cohort, you've got a certain number of days, it might be you need 2 staff to do it, in which case you need double the amount of equipment. So it's just those sorts of things you want to think about. If you've been lucky enough to get funding, and you've still got some funding available, then it may be worth investing in the equipment that you need for these tasks so that you don't have that fight and you've got everything you need and you can do it on your own terms rather than having to sort of wait and see if you can get the materials you need. Um, but you've got a whole sort of range of things there that you can do with task 3. Another way that's quite useful is really reach out to your industrial placement employers. Get them to do things like this in their placement, see if they'll get the students to do it, see if you can get them to come in. Sometimes it's nice to have people that they don't know for these sorts of activities so they can get over that sort of nervousness. So anything you can do around sort of giving the students the opportunity to do as many of these sort of advice and recordings and presentations, the easier they should find it. Quick overview then of the task 3 mark scheme. So as you can see on the left here, we have got the indicative content again. So they are expecting that the students are quite fluent, confident, and they've got clarity of speech when they're talking. And then on the right there, you can see that it's using exactly the same mark bands again. So it's somewhat effective communication there for band 1, largely effective communication for band 2, highly effective communication for band 3. And if you look at the mark scheme, you'll see that there are exactly the same as we've seen in the previous tasks, the same bands with the same sort of definitions for the content of what they're talking about. So this is just talking about the actual communication itself. So you can set up and teach the students the sort of the structure and the approach, and it will help them obviously in calming their nerves, which hopefully will make them more concise and clear, but it will also help them in sort of structuring that time to make sure that they're using what would be an appropriate amount of time to convey their thoughts. We move into task 4 then, you can see that we're back to sort of a large amount of stimulus material again. So you've got that set task brief, and in this instance, there's sort of 4 case studies here, but they're if you go and have a look in the sort of the past paper, you'll see in more detail what is given to them and what's available. And as you can see here, the tasks that they're going to be asked to do is they're going to be asked to write a report for each of the case studies. So the 4 case studies here, and they're going to have to complete each of these activities. So they're going to have to identify the issue, give reasons, identify the course of action, and justify. So it's not too dissimilar to what they've been doing in the past with their sort of recommendations on products, but this time they're looking at the case studies here. And they've got to remember they've got 4 case studies to do, and they've got to do that for each of them. So when you're teaching them technique, it's really important that they read that stem of the question so they know if they're doing all of them or some of them. It's also going to be incredibly important in terms of time management here, because they're really going to have to think about, do they have the time? How much time have they got? When do they need to move on to make sure that they're getting full coverage of each of the 4? The other thing that's going to be important in terms of skills here is there is a lot of information, and there are lots of different types of information here, because obviously it's not as simple as we've seen in the past where maybe it's one set of customers and you're making multiple recommendations. Here they have got 4 different things they're thinking about, so they've got to get into that mindset of, okay, I've done this one, right, let's move on and look at the next one. So again, it's going to be that sort of data selection, structuring, sort of skills that you're going to want to teach them for this activity here. Well, mark scheme is very similar to what we've seen before, so we're not going to go through it again. It's there, it's available. It's as we now look into task 5, again, you can see here, it's snippets from the material. There is a lot of information available. As you can see in the middle, I've got the task brief, and then you've got section A, section B, section C. There is a lot of information for this task. So again, it's going to be really important that students are really good with time management, and that they are identifying what they're going to have to do and how long they've got available to do the task. So as you can see up here in activity 5A, they're going to have to calculate data. So within the stimulus material, they were given information, financial information, which isn't here, but you can have a look in the past paper and it's there. Then as they move into sort of part 2 of 5A, again, they've got some more data that they're going to have to calculate down there. You can see as they move into section C, they're doing some more activity. So here they've got some marks for the structure and conciseness of their report, and then they're doing like a presentation. So they've been given information that they need to do. And what you can see within the section C1 there, when you're looking at it, it says the use of appropriate digital visualization and presentation techniques. That's those digital skills. Are they using sort of appropriate fonts? Have they got, so maybe are they using Open Sans because it's dyslexic friendly? Do they have different font sizes for the headings and the main text? Are they using bullet points? Have they used appropriate images? Have they got charts and graphs and tables and images? Anything that's appropriate to what they're doing? Have they maybe gone back? If it's like the finances, have they included their calculations in there? If it was to do with maybe recommending products, have they got the tables from the products in there so they can share the information? It's also going to be things like, are they using backgrounds? So rather than just having blank slides, have they got like a consistent sort of presentation to it, sort of a house style approach and things like that. So when they're doing their presentation there for section C, they are getting points for sort of the structure and clarity, and they're also getting sort of digital marks there as well. As they move into like the next activity, because there's lots of activities here, you can see we're into 5AV at this time, part 5. You can see that they're then being asked to prepare a report where they're analysing the current financial performance. They're giving advice about the suitability as PPL as a banking client. So they're going to have to look at all the data they've got and then make judgments and a rationale for the advice they've given. And then down the bottom is also then giving them some further clarification of what they need to include. So this is slightly different maybe to what they've seen in other tasks. So when you're teaching them the exam technique, for this one, you might want to say to them, okay, make sure you check, does it say under where the question stems are what you've got to include? Because if it then says further things you need to include, they're going to need to include that. A bit like when we were looking at task 4 and they were talking about case studies and there were 4 of them and they needed to do all 4. It's about that sort of taking the time to read what they're being asked to do and then action it. Again, you can see over here I've got a little bit of 5B in here. So here they're going to present their findings. So they've got sort of 15 minutes there to present. Again, it's important that they sort of plan their time accordingly. And again, in terms of logistics, do you have the cameras? Do you have the rooms? Have you got the microphones? If it's a 15-minute presentation, you might be needing to allow sort of 20 to 25 minutes per student to check in between, make sure it's charged, maybe make sure you've got enough room on the memory card for it so it doesn't run out midway through the filming, all sorts of things. Have you got the clicker? So if they're using a slide deck, it can move backwards and forwards. Has it got a working whiteboard? There's all sorts of things to consider. So it's really worth, especially for this, doing a mock so that you can iron out any of those issues ahead of time. And then you can sort of, when you do the real thing, you're all set and ready to go and you know exactly how long things are taking. And students know what a 10-15 minute presentation feels like so that they know what they're pitching to. And then you can see once they've finished their presentation down here, they've obviously got the video. So in sort of 5B, they're preparing it. And then in 5C, they're actually presenting it. So it's kind of, you've got to look at it as they go through what they've got to do and where they're going with it. So 5 kind of starts over here with the sort of the financial data, moves into the report, so sort of what they're going to be asked to do with it, whether it's an appropriate business to support and why, and then they move into their pitch for that. So it's kind of a whole range of skills, and it's going to be useful to give the students the opportunity to do that. So if you can get businesses to come in and pitch these sorts of things, because they'll have case studies, I'm sure that some of them will be willing to share, or you can write up. Again, you can go and look at past exam papers for a lot of this. If you've got exam wizards, you can go back and look at past GCSE, A-level, T-level, BTEC, any other sort of qualification, or even if you've got other exam boards and awarding organisations where you've seen scenarios that are useful, or colleagues recommend, you can go and get those and you can start substituting them out. You can cobble them together because you know you can leave the tasks the same where it's talking about the activities. All you'd need to really do is sort of swap out, say, the name, or maybe here where you've got your sort of your finances, instead of gearing and current ratio, maybe you want to use some other ratios in there. But if you change out the stimulus material, then you can get them practicing this and getting used to that. Okay, I've got to do this, and then this informs this, so that informs that. So I need to make sure that I'm doing everything I need to do as I go along. Again, we're not going to have a look at the mark scheme for task 5 because it is very similar. The only real difference here is obviously for the finance, it's going to be points based. So as long as the student gets the right answer, then they'll get the points. Now, what it is important to remember here is if they are doing calculations, that they make sure they put their formulas in and that they put in their working out. So where it's maybe worth more than 1 mark, at least then if they get the final answer wrong, there is the evidence that the student knows what they're doing because they've substituted it incorrectly. And then if there is the scope there to award those marks, it can be. And obviously in this instance, where they're carrying that forwards, if they've made an error in, say, calculating the current ratio, if they've put the financial sort of figures there of how they got to that, one, they might sort of realise as they're looking at it and go, oh, that doesn't look right, and they might be able to fix it by the time they get through to their presentation. Or two, at least then it can be seen that they do know how to calculate it, but something's gone wrong in that final calculation. So actually the advice they're giving is based on the data that they've calculated. So it's going to be incredibly important for the students there. But again, it's going to be time management. There is a lot to do. It's going to be them getting used to, okay, I've got this amount of time to do this amount of time to do that, this amount of time to do these calculations, and just getting used to splitting it up like that so that they're planning their time and they can get through all the tasks that are needed so that that presentation at the end is going to be well informed, it's going to have the right level of technical information, it's going to be concise with clarity, and they can be confident in delivering the information. So thank you for listening to this bite-sized session. Hopefully it's been a really useful overview into the assessing the retail banking and commercial banking occupational specialism. Please go and have a look at the lead examiner report and the past papers. The lead examiner report's got a lot of really useful information in there to help you with things like what misconceptions there are so you can help your students to address them, what students have done well, what they've not done so well, and obviously those examples from past papers of students who have performed well with a commentary of why that's the case, so you can share that with your students and help them to achieve their best on this occupational specialism.